couple of months, it's just been such a reflection period for myself of like, Justin passed away. And without a beat,
How are you processing?
I was like, wait, hold on, what just happened? Like, you've got a team that's relying on you and looking at you and going, Devin, like, what's the next step? What are we doing? Right? My 20s were just full of work. So I'd go literally business to business to business. And I would say like, hey, for $100 a month, I'll show your ads in all these other like 8 locations that I have.
Do you feel any like regret what you had to give up? Or do you feel like it was a good trade-off and the right trade?
Yeah, it's a heavy question. Maybe I can get through this without tears.
Watching his single mom work multiple jobs taught Devin Shurtleff early lessons about security and hard work. From running an agency and rigging up his first SMS review system to co-founding Opinion, his path has been driven by a blend of financial prudence and entrepreneurial spirit. Now, as CEO, he's processing profound loss while leading with a lesson learned from his late co-founder, Justin. Success isn't just about building a product. It's about building a fortress of people who believe in each other.
I'm starting to regret not going to things because I am going.
There's not a single founder that he'd trade his life with. Your 20s are the years that you could be working hard. And the common denominator is like, to excel at that level honestly takes sacrificing everything.
I absolutely think that like I put in the hard work there in the 20s that at some point I've started to put into perspective, like live life. You know, I had big dreams and goals and like all this like other stuff and, you know, would love to be on top. You know, but it's like, I no longer desire like that. I think there's more to life.
What is the worst thing that can happen?
I lost it.
Devin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks.
So I want to start with your childhood and upbringing. You were talking about how you felt like growing up, you talked to a bunch of your friends' parents. Was it just like an amalgamation of all of these different people's advice, or was it like one or two people that really had impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think along the way there are like people that have helped, right? One that stood out that I'm still friends with to this day. In fact, his son works for us now as a developer. Yeah, which is kind of cool to like, you know, hopefully help like on his side. But his name's Jay Taylor, and yeah, and he doesn't own a really like a really sexy business at all. It's just like, it's a very generic, he cleans hoods at the casinos for like the big buffets. So at night when they shut the buffet down, his crew would go in and clean all the hoods, right? And he made, you know, pretty good money. And, but he is one that I think really ingrained in me that like, there's no like secret to like making money or wealth or any of that stuff. And I feel like this is largely coming back to like money. And I hope like, I hope that's not the theme of, you know, here today, but he basically said like nothing substitutes hard work. And that going in and cleaning hoods, I mean, for him, like he has guys that would do it, but if a guy called in sick, and he would ingrain in me that like, it doesn't matter where you're at, like the job has to get done. And so like no one's above the hard work, you know? And so I thought a lot about that. That's like, and I had this saying that I heard, and I repeat it a lot to a lot of people, which is the magic you're looking for is in the work you're avoiding. There's no magic bullet for anything. It doesn't matter hard work. It doesn't make, and some people just expect success to come, and but they're not willing to do the hard work. And the other one is from Ronnie Coleman, bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Huge guy, and to be fair, it's probably not a good analogy because he can barely walk now. But but he has a saying that I like love as well, which is like everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, but nobody wants to lift heavy ass weights. And I mean those like two themes. It's just like it doesn't matter what you do to be successful has hard work with it, and no one's above it. Like you have to be willing to do the hard work. You know, in your spare time. Like you've got to be willing to do the work and put in the extra effort. Otherwise, like you're not going to see the success.
It's so funny you say that. I wrote a post about this because it was something I was thinking about too, is I feel like a form of procrastination is just like learning sometimes can be a form of procrastinating, right? Because you can get stuck in this loop of like, I'm just going to learn how to like be a good podcaster and like watch all these videos and like study all these people and never actually do the thing.
Yeah.
Usually because it's easier to just like talk about it or learn about it than it is to do it. So to your point, like, I totally agree. I think like everybody knows what to do. Just like doing that is hard. And oftentimes I have this notion of like the anti-to-do list, which is like, what are all the things you don't want to do? Write that down and then just do it, right? Because that's usually where the magic is.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the analogy that that I like is like fishing, right? Like so many people like go on Google Maps, they're going to pick the best spot and they do all this like effort to get the right tackle and the right pole and the right rod, and they save all this money for all this stuff. But the guy who catches the most fish is the guy with the line in the wall. So like you do all this effort and prep and everything like that. And I've learned that with like employees as well. Is like a lot of them will bullshit you like all the way through. And I don't know if I can say that. Right?
Yeah.
But they know the fluffy words, but like they don't actually do the work at the end of the day. Right? And that's like really hard when you're hiring, especially key positions, is figuring out which ones just know the fluffy work and which ones are willing to do it.
Who else? You mentioned Ronnie Coleman has been like inspirational to you. That is that's famous that we'd all know.
Oh man, that's a good question. Follow like a lot of bodybuilders,
Yeah.
like stuff. So like Ronnie Coleman there's one actually that's like, he's like more Instagram, YouTube famous kind of, but his name's Julian Smith. And like, he's like a big, people know him as the quad guy because his legs are just insane. But he's one that's like, again, it all comes down to like work ethic, like putting in the work. That like you can't like, I mean, for him, he claims to be like very natural bodybuilder, but to get like the physique that he has, it's like people can do it with drugs and they can do it with steroids and like all this other stuff. But he's like, but if you're not willing to, you can do it naturally, but you got to be willing to put in the work.
Bodybuilding and like working out and lifting weights is kind of an analogy to life. I think about this often, right? Like if you want to improve, you need to like, sometimes the better strategy, I've struggled with this for a while, which is like, I'm just going to like hard charge something and go at it. And then eventually you end up in this kind of like yo-yo thing where you're like really going all at it. And then you're stopping and starting and stopping. And I think if you look at any great bodybuilder, like it's just 5% increments week over week, like executing and like being consistent.
Yeah.
And I kind of think about like life and building a business and all of that very similarly, which is like, you just have to like, the harder thing is like, if you can just compound yourself 2% a week, 3% a week, and do that for 100 weeks, 500 weeks, like you'll be in a completely different place.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, like people are trying to look for this like magic bullet where it's really like those 2%, 3% weeks compounded over like 100 weeks. And that's like the magic. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
absolutely. I mean, in addition to like increasing yourself, right? It's like figuring out how to replicate yourself, for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially for me. And Barbara Corcoran from Shark Tank this one time, and I don't know if it was on a show or whatever, but she said like, you've got to learn that no one is ever going to do it 100% like you are. You've got to be okay with 80% is the max that person's ever going to perform when compared to yourself, right? Someone who's setting up the process, thinking through it, owning it, oftentimes has more skin in the game than them. You've got to be okay with 80%. But if you can hire 2 people at 80% to replicate yourself, now you've got 160% of like your own self, right? And so in addition to like, how do I increase myself? You've also got to think of like, how do I offload the things? Like as a net, I'm increasing, but I've also got people underneath me performing, not to my level, but are performing well enough that they can replicate some of it. Because you can't do, especially with the family, you can't do it. You've got to build a team and you've got to find your people around you that are willing to do it with you. I really don't think you.
Have you heard of the way Brian Chesky, the founder and CEO of Airbnb, talks about this?
Mm-mm.
So there's this whole thing that you must have seen called Founder Mode. That article. There's an article that came out like a couple of months ago by Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator, and he wrote this article called Founder Mode. And the premise is that like founders should never themselves from the level of operation, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, like founders should not micromanage, but be in the details. And Brian Chesky gave a talk, and that's how this whole term came about. And somebody asked Brian in an interview, like, how, if you're the founder and CEO of this company, how can you be everywhere? like at once. He said paradoxically, being everywhere at once in the company and being involved in all the details actually ended up freeing up more time. And the logic was, when I first heard that, I was confused. The logic was he did for a period of like 2 years was he was so involved in the details. He basically understood how Brian thinks and like how Brian acts. So to your point, what he effectively did across the organization was he scaled himself because everybody in the company knew what Brian wanted and like how he would think. So I thought that was a really interesting framework.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like depending on your team, it could be a learning curve on that, but interesting.
Okay. So we were talking about Truckee. So when did you leave Truckee?
So I graduated high school in 2007. I actually did a year and a half at the University of Nevada, which is like right in Reno. So I stayed home. I mean, I lived in Reno, but I could go home every weekend. Again, I have a single mom and needs, help and, shoveling snow and everything. I mean, Truckee just dumps a lot, right? Plus, like, it was nice being home. A lot of my friends, like, they all went to UNR at the same time. And so I did that for about a year and a half. And then just decided, like, I'm not happy here. All my siblings had moved out to Utah. And so I was like, I'm going to go check it out. And so
Why did they move to Utah?
Religious reasons. Like, they all came to either BYU or like I grew up like LDS. And so there's a big LDS population here, Salt Lake, and Utah County. And so they came out here to go to school, or one of my sisters went to hair school. And so coming out here, they kept trying to say like, hey, there's so many single people, or, there's a lot of like opportunity here. There's, jobs, whatever. And so I came out to visit for either Thanksgiving or Christmas, like break. And I had some friends that lived out here already who had moved from Truckee, who'd moved out here. And so I came, hang out with them, and I went home going, all right, I'm going to move. So year of 2009, January, I packed up my stuff and drove out and packed up my truck, put everything in the back of it, drove out. In fact, halfway over here on the move, I pulled over to the side of the road and I was just like crying. Like, I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I going? It just like felt like the right thing to do. I mean, I sat there for probably 30 minutes. Like, it was just like, no, it's the right thing to do. And so yeah, when I came out here, decided that I'd go to school for about 6 months, BYU, and then
you transferred from?
Yeah, so I transferred from UNR in, and then decided that I would go to the U. So, because I didn't really know like where I was going to land there, and so BYU is pretty competitive. Everyone's like trying to, rankings and all that stuff's like pretty
really good school. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good school, but everyone's like really competitive. So going to the U was like a different like vibe to it.
It's so
let's study together, really helpful and stuff like that. So I stayed there, and yeah, went to BYU, went to the U, and then my last semester at the U, guidance counselor called and he was like, "Hey, come in and chat with me. Like, I want to understand what's after this for you." And so he's like, "Hey, do you want to stay for a master?" I'm like, "Well, not really. I'm kind of thinking about it. If I do it, I'm going to go take the GMAT. I want to go to, and candidly, I want to go to like an Ivy League or something like that." And he's like, "Well, what if we waive the GMAT and we get you a scholarship and will you stay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I guess, like, I'll apply and see." And he's like, "Oh, it's like, we'll just put you in the program." But he's like, it's formality, fill out the application. So I got accepted into the Masters of Finance program. And, yeah, got all the way there. First day of school, they call and they're like, "Hey, we need, your taxes and everything like that." And I ended up getting, just a partial scholarship to come instead of a full, what I was expecting. But yeah, ended up staying and, yeah, after school, just starting a business and going from there.
Were academics really important growing up for you? Like, were you a pretty academic person?
I started to realize probably midway through high school that like grades mattered. But yeah, not really. I mean, I was always like a pretty good student when I applied myself,
Yeah. Did you, you said did you work hard in school?
Yeah. So I had a full-time job like the entire time through college.
40-hour week, 40-hour job?
Yeah. So some of that was, and when I say job, like some of that was like doing my own thing. I did a lot of marketing, a lot of affiliate marketing stuff, a lot of paid search, Facebook stuff. I was kind of doing that. And then, and I had a brief stint at Vivint Home Security there. I built their affiliate program up. there as well. So I was there about a year and a half kind of during that.
When you were graduating high school and you were choosing, like, how did you know what you wanted? Did you spike like any particular area, or how did you know what you want?
Well, I mean, given my upbringing, right, I knew I wanted to do something in business. And so I was doing like all the prereqs for accounting, doing like, I mean, my generals, like all that stuff. I went to the U, I was in accounting for a year. And then it really came down to like during my undergrad, I went in and talked to my guidance counselor. I'm like, I hate accounting. Like, what do I do? And well, I mean, you could pivot. And I'm like, what's the fastest thing I could do? Because again, I'm running kind of like my own marketing agency on the side that was not that big. I mean, but we were doing kind of some revenue there and stuff. And so I was like, what can I do? What's the fastest way I can get out of college now? And he's like, well, you just do business administration. And he's like, we can get you out in a year. And if I was looking at accounting, I was like another year and a half or almost 2 years. So I was like, oh, let's just switch.
In college, the marketing agency, I'm curious, like, what was why did you want to start that? Was it because you wanted to make a side like income? Was it just like following your curiosity?
And I mean, maybe some of this like caught up in education, but kind of like coming out of high school and then moving to Utah, I started a business that basically put TVs up in different locations, like local locations. So I had one in a climbing gym. I had one in a bar. I had one in a grocery store, a couple other like locations like that. And then I would sell ads on that. So I'd go literally business to business to business. And I would say like, hey, for $100 a month, I'll show your ads in all these other like 8 locations that I have. And so I started there, realized like advertising, like, oh, people are willing to pay for ads, you know? And that led me to like more online marketing stuff, and Facebook advertising at the time was like brand new. No one knew how to do it. I had a buddy that was like really kind of nerdy about that kind of stuff. And so he like learned how to do it. And I actually kind of fell into it because I had my buddy who I knew how to do it. I had another friend that said, hey, do you know anyone who knows Facebook? And so I connected the two. And I'm like, yeah, my friend Derek does that. And so he kept like trying to get with Derek of like, hey, let's do this. Like, let's get set up. And Derek was like, yeah, I've got like another client. Like, you know, I don't have time for that. So finally I went to Derek and I'm like, hey, show me how to do this. He was like, okay. So I said, I will pay you. And so he came over for like 2 days in a row. We did, we went through how to set up ad campaigns and targeting and all this stuff. And again, I knew one person who knew how to do Facebook ads. And so the original guy said, well, I'll run your ads. And so, at the time, I mean, you could get a click for 5 cents. Like he can't do it. Right. And so that was like getting into that, that was like my first step into Facebook ads. And then the guy that we were running ads for was doing affiliate marketing. And that's how I got exposed to that world. And then that just broadened my horizons from Facebook ads to Google ads to, I mean, it wasn't Bing at the time, but there was Yahoo ads that you could run. You could run native ads. So that like started to broaden my horizons for like, oh, what's possible like here? And that guy, his name was Jared. He ended up really showing me that like you can do a ton of revenue marketing, right? Because again, poor kid growing up, like I'd never seen money like the money we were generating. At one point, we were spending probably $200,000 a month on Facebook ads, and this was back again 10 years ago when like that was a lot of money.
Wow. This is while you were in college?
Yeah, it's while I was in college. So that's what I was doing. And while I was running ads for him, I started to do affiliate marketing. So I was running ads for myself. And so that's like kind of what like brought that up. And then Vivint, I went over to do for them. So when I got into affiliate marketing, that's when Vivint was like, hey, we need someone to do this. At the time I was looking at getting married. Maybe I need something more stable, you know, I don't know. And so yeah, I went to work for Vivint, home security. And then when I left Vivint, started a marketing agency. It was like, okay, I learned all this Facebook stuff that I understand. Was kind of like working for Jared, kind of on like a commission only model there. And then went to Vivint. And then after I left Vivint, I said, okay, I'm going to start an agency.
So how did you manage in college? What did you have to give up to manage like building this business, doing school full time?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard because I would get up really early in the morning, run my ads. And then, you know, when you get to like 3:00, I would pack up, drive up to the U, and then do my classes, get off at, 10, drive home, do it all again. That was my life, like almost all through like doing that.
Are you a routine oriented person?
Pretty
Yeah.
routine. Yeah.
Do you feel any like regret what you had to give up? Or do you feel like it was a good trade-off in the right trade?
Would I do it again? Yes. Because I think and just like college, like I don't think college is necessarily about getting the degree. It's about, can you do a hard thing consistently for long enough? And I feel like that was compounded there with like, all right, I've got to survive. During that time, I did get married, right? And so you're trying to balance relationship and you're trying to balance like your own personal life and having fun and all this stuff. But I mean, that's what people all the time. Now that I'm in my 30s, like my 20s were just full of work, like the entire time.
I'm 29, so about to be 30 next year. And like I think about that question, right? Is like, do I regret anything? Would I have done anything differently in my 20s? I think my opinion on regret is like, you're always going to like think about something that you could have done better because there's so many, you might regret doing something.
Yeah.
But I think in general, like, is that your 20s are the years that you should be like working hard, blogging, especially in your early 20s when, you know, more often than not, you're not committed to a relationship. You don't really like, you have all this like free time.
You can afford to go to zero.
You can afford to go to zero.
But you can't like when you get a family and kids.
Yeah. And I think like this is something I think about too. I'm curious to know how you think about it. Is like, of course, there's examples where you truly, if you take a risk, like you could lose everything and like you may not be able to recover. I'm sure there's many examples of that. I think more often than not though, like people overvalue risk, the impact of like things going wrong, and undervalue the impact of like what will happen if things go right, especially in your early 20s, right? Like you have all these smart people that like take a risk to try something new because they think they'll fail or whatever. But the reality is like more gainfully employed because you have more skills and like you probably can go back to your job. Like, do you think people, like, what is your take on risk? Like, do you think people assess risk correctly in the early part of their careers?
You know, I think that probably depends on the person, right? Because I know a lot of people who will risk it all, right? They're put it all on black type people. And then I know a lot of people that are pretty conservative. Personally, I take like a two-pronged approach to that. Like I try to be like pretty well balanced, where as like getting a degree for me was always about, well, if stuff doesn't work out on the entrepreneurship side, I could always go price bonds at some city center or whatever, with a finance degree and be fine, And so like I tried to lay the foundation of that. I try to save a lot. I still save a lot. I don't spend a ton of money on anything just because of, again, security blanket growing up, like all that like background stuff. But yeah, I do think like people need to take more risks. And I think that they think about all the perceived risks that could happen, right? Versus the actual risks of what will happen. And people get too caught up in that perceived side that the actual side like is probably very, very small.
It's so Ferriss. It's so
no.
Tim Ferriss is like he's one of the early podcasters and has this podcast called The Tim Ferriss Show. And when I was deciding to take risks and start my business and all this stuff, there was this like framework that he used that was there's two frameworks that I use that have been really helpful. The first one is something called fear setting, where usually you'll have a goal and you'll imagine that goal and you'll set the goal and you'll try to accomplish it. The reverse of that is like fear setting, which is you set the fear of like, what is the worst thing that can happen? And like, rather than understanding the fear on the surface level, which I think a lot of people do, it's 2 or 3 levels deeper. And you really understand like, what is the risk? Like, let's say you have a home, your parents have a home. Okay, you take this risk and it doesn't work out. And worst case is like you go move into your parents' house. Okay, well, like, will you survive? Will you be able to do that? And I think like really going deep and understanding with hyper clarity what the actual risk is helps you like more deeply come to terms with like, okay, maybe it's not that bad, rather than letting your imagination like kind of make up all these scenarios. The second one is you must have heard, like, do you know Jeff Bezos's regret minimization framework?
Sounds right.
It's not really a framework. He calls it a framework. The idea is like, in order to make a decision, think about at the end of your life what you will regret. For him, when he was starting Amazon, like he was in finance and stuff, right? So his thing was like, well, regret at the end of my life not taking the risk. And if so, like, I should just project out my life and do whatever it's can to minimize the amount of regret that I'll experience in life, assuming that you're going to experience regret in some cases. So those are just like two frameworks that have been helpful.
Yeah, I got married last year, last April too.
Congrats.
Yeah, my wife, I got married, I was divorced and then got remarried. But my wife now puts a lot of that into perspective for me, right? Because I'm one that's like, oh, it's just like work and, and just plug in and everything like that. But she is like more of a free spirit. It's like, no, let's go out, let's have fun, and take like those opportunities. So, but I think along the framework of like what Jeff Bezos is like, I'm starting to regret not going to things because I am going. Does that make sense? Like I'm starting to like live more of life. Whereas you asked the question of like, do you regret your 20s or like, anything there? And it's like, yeah, not a regret, but like, I absolutely think that like I put in the hard work there in the 20s that at some point, especially what we've gone through in the last, like I've started to put into perspective, like live life.
One more question around the money thing, because I think it's really interesting. You mentioned that like, even now you don't spend money and you're pretty careful with your money. I think that that's a healthy attachment to money or an unhealthy attachment to money. In other words, do you think you wanting to hold on to money and not spending is out of fear, or is it out of just, you don't need that much?
No, it's definitely a product of like my upbringing, wanting like a security at all times. That's like, well, if things ever go south, like even today, like we have many employees, we've raised multiple rounds of funding. Like I still think today, opinion could go to zero, right? We have half units, like we've got clients that love us. We're building a great product. Our retention rates are good. Everything is like great at opinion, but I still believe at any point it can all go to zero. And that's an insecurity that I carry, just because I never want to ever be in the situation that my mom was in, where it was like, all right, go to another job, provide, and have to go paycheck.
Andy Grove was like the first employee of Intel and wrote this book called High Output Man, and this other book called like Only the Paranoid Survive. And his whole thing was like, people who are paranoid are constantly thinking about like problems and are constantly problem focused. And like when you talk about that, I think like some of the best founders I know though are like constantly paranoid and constantly knowing that like the company can go to zero. And I think it's important because like, if you don't think that, you're basically like thinking that like you're resting on your laurels in some way, right? You're like, okay, we made it.
Yeah.
Right. I think the minute you think you made it, like, especially in our industry, especially in tech, like you settle for 6 months, like you're already behind. Right.
Yeah. Well, especially with like all the AI stuff that you guys are super, right? That has accelerated the growth. And we think about that all.
100%. I'm like, I honestly, the way I feel is like, if you're in a car, there's no gear that you can put on drive. It's literally like neutral. And like, I almost feel like I'm on, those escalators at the airport, the flat escalators at the airport. I feel like there's only one way and the escalator is like pulling you back and I'm like running against the traffic, against the escalator.
Yeah.
And like, that's what startups feel like. And I think the mentality you need, because like, being stagnant isn't being stagnant. It's like putting you in reverse, right? Like if I stand on that escalator, I'm going the opposite direction. And I just feel like it's important to have that pressure on yourself. I think the challenge though, is it comes at the cost of your mental health, right? Like I know there's a podcast called Founders, super awesome. It's by this guy called David Senra. The whole thing is he reads a biography every week, records a solo podcast and talks about the biographies. He's a voracious reader. The cool thing about him is he's read so many biographies that he can tie together two disparate founders and be like, oh, Steve Jobs did this when he was in his early 20s. It was really cool to see Larry Ellison do that in his 30s, right? He has this like encyclopedic knowledge of all these founders.
Yeah.
One thing he mentioned is out of all the founders he's read about, hundreds of people, there's not a single founder that he'd trade his life with. And the common denominator is like, to excel at that level, honestly takes like, just like you sacrificing everything, right? And like, sometimes it's at the cost of your mental health, but I think that's like a trade-off that like, maybe to be in the top 1% you have to make. Like, how do you think about that? Like, how do you think about like sacrifices and what's worth it and what's not?
The last like 5 years for me has put into a lot more perspective because, I had big dreams and goals and like all this like other stuff and, would love to be, on the sign top, but it's like, I no longer desire like that. Right. And it used to be all about like work and let's move forward and let's do all this stuff. And a lot of it, again, comes back to like insecurity and trying to build my own like security blanket for myself. Yeah, I think there's more to life than just like money and like all stuff, and family, like to me has become more important. And again, like coming back to, I've alluded to this a couple of times, but even in the last like couple of months, it's just been such a reflection period for myself of like, what are you doing? Like, are you building the relationship that you need to?
Justin was like, also like, obviously I didn't know him the way you did, but he was like one of those guys in the industry that like at conferences, I would see him in the gym. He'd be like super high energy. He's like, "What are you working out, man?" And then I'd see him on the conference floor. He'd fist bump me. We threw some events together. When I heard about that, like it did hit me. How is that? Like, how are you processing that? No easy way. There's no easy answer. There's no rule book.
Yeah, it's a heavy question. Maybe I can get through this without tears. But I don't think like there's that saying, I'm gonna utter this, but it's just like you don't know what you have till you lose it. I think there's a lot of that in him. So like the night that I found out about it an hour after, his best friend called and said, Justin passed away. And without a beat, the next was got to take care of his finances, got to take care of the business, like, and all this stuff. And I think it just puts into perspective, like back to all this is that like, I was like, wait, hold on. Let's go back to step one. Like what just happened, And I think oftentimes like people looked at us as like business partners, right? It's like he runs kind of the front half of the house, the sales, like that side. He loved that. The networking side, like that was like his domain, to be there. And mine, I love the ops side. I love the product. Like I love the teams, like, I'll fulfill it all. And so it was always just like, you bring it in, and I'll take care of it, like on the back end. And so, a lot of people looked at us like, oh, this like duo that works together, that kind of, that think differently from each other and everything like that. But, in that moment, it's just like, no, wait a second. Like he is like one of my best friends first, And so like, let's get that out of the way, and it's some of those things, it's like, you don't realize the relationship that you guys build. I mean, cause even for me, it's like 6 months ago, it's like, oh yeah, Justin and I are good buds and, and we talk all the time and, but then you start to realize like, oh no, like he's probably one of the closest bonds that I have because I see the guy every day. I spend hours a day with him for the last 8 years together. And, putting that all into perspective is, coming back to some of the earlier comments that I had is that's what's put into perspective. Because in that moment, it wasn't about the business and the company and everything like that was coming up from, his friend telling me, it was like, you got to take care of the business. You got to take care of all this and make sure that like Lindsay's taking care of and all this. And it was just like, no. None of that's important. It's the relationship that I have with him is important, like step one. Right. And so that's been a lot to process there. I, up until about 2 weeks ago, I hadn't taken a day off. And so, because you can't, right? Like you've got a team that's relying on you and looking at you and going, Devin, like, what's the next step? What are we doing? Right. And that was kind of hard. A lot of it was just like, all right, like this is my role in all of this is to make sure that like our employees are taken care of, that his family's like taken care of. Like he and I shared a lot of finance stuff together, putting all that. But yeah, it's been tough. Like it really has. And all these reflections of like, man, I don't know if I can do this without you, doubts creep in, all that other stuff. Yeah, it's been rough, but I also know like the type of guy he is, right? Talk about like high energy, always positive. I don't think that guy could have a bad day. We had bad moments here and there, and we definitely had our arguments, right? But they would always end with him being like, I love you. And it was, we would just crack up and hug and
him do that.
He's like, but I love you. And it was like, but it was always that like, yeah, again, bad moments, but like he couldn't have a bad day, and he was always high energy and annoyingly optimistic about things all the time. And sometimes it's just like, oh man, this is not going to work out. Like it's going to work out. It's be fine. Yeah, we'll get it, and but yeah, he was absolutely the eternal on everything. In every scenario.
When I hear this from you, I think what feels so challenging is like founder, there's already so much weight on you, right? People are looking at you to what's next. You have all these different stakeholders that you have to answer to. And when you go through something like this, like double eyes, triple eyes, quadruple eyes, they're now looking on you, and like must be so hard because you have to do literal stuff, like figure out the reorg, how does the company operate, like deal with it.
Yeah.
Like how do you even communicate like something like this to the team?
Yeah, I'll be honest, I was like making the phone calls first to our board, right? You know, kind of one by one, and often then telling the entire team. And so when I feel like that, you know, I told everyone like, hey, I need you to come in. Because normally we have our morning stand up, and you know, we've got a handful of remote employees, but they're still in the area. And so everyone like, you got to come in, like, hey, we got to talk about something. Come in for a team stand up. I didn't want to allude like it was bad or good or so. You know, the whole team's in there in our big area, private equity company, a PMS system. They're thinking like it's like this exciting announcement, and just to watch their faces, like the grief rush over them was like one of the hardest things I think I've experienced. And like going through that and what's next, and that's like pretty hard. That was absolutely one of the hardest things. And kind of learn who your people are. And like, I feel like all of mine showed up, and I've surrounded myself with like a lot of good people, and my entire team has rallied, right? And they know the type of guy he is. Super optimistic, always happy and all this stuff. And so I think people have grieved like the way they need to grieve there. But I think a lot of people have stepped up and gone, well, wouldn't have done in this scenario. He would have just gone, well, let's push through it, you know? And it is what it is, and it sucks. And this is one that like, there's no way around it except for right up the middle on it. And so that's like the attitude we've had. It's just like, nope, we're going to push forward. We're going to push even harder because yeah, that's what Justin and I wanted, right? We had big goals that we wanted to push forward on. But there was an experience that I had with Justin's wife a couple days after. So he passed away on a Saturday. I get a call from Justin's brother, and he says, hey, I need you to be at the house today because Lindsay has some questions about finances, and she like wants to go through money and, you know, some of this other stuff. I'm like, isn't this pretty early? And Sean's like, no, like Lindsay really has some questions. And I got more context on that, where she was trying to figure out where to bear, trying to figure out, does she need to move? Like some of those just questions of like, because she wanted to be very close to him. And so as we go up to the house, and it's myself, his best friend's there, a couple other, like one of the financial advisor that was like a contingency plan, something that happened to him there. And we're sitting around, and again, she kind of explains this context of like, I want to know where like we should bury him. And, you know, we're all like talking about that, and Justin's mom walks in, and she looks around, and, you know, it was heartbreaking to see her, right? Like she just lost her son and lost her husband, and, you know, 2 years ago. And that was a hard funeral for us to go to because he was, you know, fairly young as well. And that's something that I've thought about over and over and over and over again, which is, man, she looks around and she says, like, what a team that he's assembled to make sure that you're taken care of. And I lost it. One, you know, somebody can sit there and help. And I left that meeting, and I went home, and I wasn't sleeping very well, like throughout all this, and weeks, like, you know, an hour here and there, up all night. And between the stress of like the business running the company, and also like what she's going through and losing like a big person I saw every single day. Because not only did we, you know, we worked out in the morning. I saw him, he was the first thing I saw in the morning, you know, it was a big hug. What's up, man? You know, and like all that stuff. And I'm trying to like stay in routine, like trying to figure out, what does this mean? Grieve? Like, I don't know, you know? And so in the middle of the night, I just, I had this thought of like, did the same thing for me, built the fortress around me. I mean that, and we did that in the very early days of Opinion. One of the first things, we needed advisors. We got to go out and see the advisors and figure out who can be advisors for us. And so we brought in a bunch of advisors, Chase Harrington being one of them, right? And so we started to go out and say, who are the key players here and how do we network with them? And not anyone we're raising money from or anything like that. We just need advice. We need somebody to give us advice. And then we went out and found investors that weren't just, because we had people kind of throwing money at us, because we had a different product. It was a little more automated. We were in the beginning of kind of the review stuff, especially for multifamily. We were like one of the first of the game, money coming at us from, different angles. And, and then we go out and we find investors that are world-class, right? And right, being one in the multifamily space is phenomenal. Huge network, tons of advice, all of this stuff. Terry Slattery being one that, like advisor-wise, like we were just connected to like all these people. And so we're building like this network of people around us. Even last year when we closed our Series A, we had a handful of different term sheets come in. They were all around the same valuation. And we picked the person that was the most human, right? Which was Five Elms Capital. And we picked them because they treated us like we were humans. We weren't just like another dollar to them. They cared about our goals. Like they asked us specifically, like, what do you want? Oh, we want to, this, we want to grow. No. Like, what do you want? Like you personally, like, what do you want? They were in touch with like what we wanted. And I just, so we had advisors, we've got great investors, we've got a team, right? That has like our leadership team has absolutely rallied around myself. And I just keep going back to what Justin's mom said, is like, you got a great team and I feel that for myself. It's like he literally built a fortress around myself that if I need anything, go to their team. I can go to our advisor. I can go to our investors there. And that was like your moats, right? And he lived it. And he lived it on my behalf.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
How did you meet Justin? I don't think I know.
The gym.
The whole places.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. If you're in Utah more, a lot of people meet a lot of people that, right? Because, it was the guy behind the scenes was saying, he's like, yeah, Utah's not a place that like, or you party or do all that stuff. It's like, we work and we work out. Like that is like Utah 101. And so yeah, I actually, so I had a workout partner that knew Justin from the gym and introduced. It's not some sexy story at all, but yeah, just the gym.
Yeah. What was the journey of finding like product market fit and finding what to do? Because it's such a messy. I was talking to Dimitri from Knock yesterday. Yeah. And we were talking about how like for Knock, there was a period of 3 years where they didn't like market fit. Like Jeff Bezos just did a interview with I think Andrew Sorskin or somebody, I don't know how to last name, but he said the hardest thing that he's ever done at Amazon was to raise that first round of money, right? And I think some people forget like the early days of a company is like super hard, right? Because like you don't know what you're doing. There's so many opportunities. You're not narrow. You don't like, what was that journey like?
Yeah, it actually started with another partner and I, and Morgan and I had been college room friends for a while, and he was working for a CRM for a dealer. Just called me. I'm like, what do you mean? And it's the worst. It's the grind. He was a CSM there. It's like, I just don't like it. And I was like, well, and he called me because I was, running an agency at the time, had clients and everything. And I don't know. And I'm like, look, man, I'm not getting off the phone until you give me an idea for business. And a lot of it was just like an exercise. I wanted him to get him out of his funk a little bit. I just wanted to like kind of test him. And he's like, well, I think reviews are like a big thing right now. He's like, that's all the dealerships are talking about is like getting more reviews, I was like, well, how do we do that? He's like, we can email the customers. And I had just like gotten into tech marketing. It was still like kind of new, like not a lot of people were doing it. And at the time, like I had been building like, a couple different like WordPress pages and like all this stuff. And so I rigged up SMS with like a web page and through like some API service. And so when you submitted the form, it sent an email and a text at the same time asking for a review. An hour later, I'm like, hey, check this out. And he usually says, yeah, that was incredible. Let's do it. And it was the most janky, right? But it worked. And I had a handful of like business owners that I knew, those that I'd either done agency work for or something. And I just called them up, and one of them still our client to this day. And his name was Ryan. And I was like, Ryan, can we try this? And he's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's put it on. And and he runs like an IT service or B2C IT company. And so we put it on, we sent 1,000 emails, and he got like 100 reviews, like right away. He's like, dude, that was awesome. And so that's really like how we started with one client. And again, I'm running an agency at the time. And so Morgan's kind of like, hey man, like if you pay me a little bit of money, I'll do this full time. And I was like, all right, give me a couple grand a month and like you run this thing. And so we were kind of running it, the two of us at the time, and it just wasn't going like anywhere. We had a handful of clients, but I mean, we're like ARR was like 25. It was like, and so I met another buddy, his name was Alex. He called me. He's like, hey, I think I'm getting tired. I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, I think I'm going to let go. And I was like, why? What'd you do? And he's like, I just think the company's out of money. I think getting layoffs and like all this stuff. I was, that's kind of weird. I was like, well, let's go to dinner tonight and like with the wives and we'll hang out. And so we went to dinner, and when we got to dinner, he's like, yep. And so I was like, well, if you want to come sell review software, let me know. And he's like, yeah, sure. So I sent him the links, and I'm like, yeah, here's how it works and everything. And 3 days later, he's like, how do I take a credit card for this? Like, what's pricing look like? And I was like, oh, like limited. And he's like, no. I need to take a credit card now. Customer that wants to sign up. I'm like, what? And so he just started selling it. And so it was kind of the three of us for about 4 or 5 months. I was seeing, Justin at the gym like every day and telling him like, hey, I got this like kind of thing. And he was like, oh, it's like kind of interesting. And he's like, let me talk to some buddies about it. So he went out and like approached a couple of people about selling it. And at the time, again, marketing agency. And so he's like, hey, this is like a pretty cool product. He's like, what are you going to do with it? And I was like, well, they need a CEO. Like I think it has legs. I can't like give it full attention right now. And so that's how we started. It was the four of us for a year. And about a year and a half, talk about a slog. Like we went through salons, spa, like medical offices, went through chiropractor, CrossFit gyms, maid cleaning services. We just had like all these like different industries that we're going after. We're battling like uphill battle against all these other companies that have been doing for a minute. And like once you get in the space, like at the time I was like, oh, like dealerships need that. Like let's go. And then you start to get more educated about the space, and you're like, a lot of competitors. And so talk about like finding a product market fit. Justin was well connected with this really wealthy family who invests in real estate, and Milburn & Company, which is in Salt Lake. Jed Milburn's like, yeah, I'll take a meeting with you guys. And so we went to Jed Milburn's office and sat with him, said we want to do reviews, get us a resident list, and we'll text your residents. And he's like, well, you got to get that from AMC, manages its properties. And so we went over to AMC, and he's like, but you got a management company on board because they manage all the finance, like in, the management side. Like, oh man, it's going to be a heavy sales process. So we go over there, we go over to AMC, and it's like, if you've ever been to AMC, they're like, number 3, 2, 4, like wherever they're at, like they fluctuate. But I mean, they're a big company. You go to their office, you're like, I hope they're not watching it. But yeah, But yeah, I mean, we kind of walked in and we're like, where are we? We meet with, I'm blanking on her name, but we meet with the gal over there, and she's like, yeah, like we've tried stuff like this before, like it doesn't work. And we're like, well, we'll just try it, And so we're like, Jed wants us to try it on his properties, like we're going to try it. And so we got a resident list and we blasted it out, and they got like in like 3 days. And she's like, oh, what did you do? And we're like, oh yeah, we just like, we worked them through our system. And she's like, how did you do this? And then that was it. It's like, we realized that, AMC was like kind of our first, and she called back. She's like, I want this on, 80 different properties. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, 80 locations. Like we only had locations total, like on the other side of thing, maybe 100 at the time. Oh, wow, this is like a big rollout. And she's like, yeah, and if you get them all, like, we've got 700 properties, whatever. And we were like, wow, this is incredible. So that's how we started in property management, is we went AMC, and then everybody knows everybody, as you've like kind of realized. And so, yeah, we just started working property management. We decided from a services side is what we call our business that's like non-multifamily, salon, spa, medical, like all that stuff. We still have a handful of customers there. But when you look at the retention rates on them, they just weren't that great. Side for us, it was, they just never canceled. And so, I mean, it really just came down to a financial decision that like, these are great customers, great industry, super underserved, needs our product. And how we started, how we found multifamily.
One more question. Do you have a favorite memory, Justin?
This one that like kind of popped into my mind first, I'm just like literally running through a handful because, we travel all over the world together. Like, we were in London in September and, Mexico at the beginning of the year, California, like, Texas and like places. But so a lot of great. But the last time I saw John, our offices, like where we're in a brand new office now. It's a whole other topic, but where offices were at our old office was, he was on one side in the corner and I'm on the other corner. When he would leave, for the day, he would, he'd kind of come out and, walk by my office and tap on my glass, like, hey, I'm leaving, for the day. And he would always call me like 30 minutes later about something. We would talk, but he'd be like, hey, I'm taking off, and, that Thursday before he drove down to Zions, he came by, did his little tap on the glass. I'm like, yeah, and he gets in his car and it's right outside my window. I can see him and he backs up, pulls his car back in, puts it in park, back in, knocks on my glass. I open, I'm like, you all right? He's like, yeah, I just realized like, yeah, for a minute. He's like, cause I'm going to Zions and then I was supposed to be out the following week, for vacation, going to Mexico. And, I'm not going to see you for a while. I'm like, oh yeah, man. He's like, hey, just want I love you. That was like uncommon. He told me that a lot. Like, I love you, man. But like, more meaningful. I mean, it was like, I love you too, and hug, which again was not abnormal, but it wasn't like an everyday thing, and, I'll see you when you get back, and that was my last interaction with him. And I am so grateful. And not that it normally was but I'm just so grateful for that. Like,
I just want to say that like, we didn't really know each other at all for this, right? Like I knew Justin a little bit. I want you to know that like you have another human in your corner. I'm like here to support you. I hope we continue to be friends. And I really appreciate you like opening up because like I can't imagine I have a co-founder and like it's hard. So like I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. And I know a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit. So thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've definitely seen not only love from like everything, but like the entire industry for us has like really rallied. And I don't know what it's like in a lot of other industries, but I think and know that this industry is special. Like a tight-knit group of people. And we've absolutely felt like the love from people, industry. I mean, people like yourself. It's like there are humans, absolutely humans, and everybody has a story, and everyone has feelings, and everyone has something like share and give. And they've given it for the last. Appreciate you. Thank you.